You're listening to Lexington Community Radio, WLXU 93.9, and this is Bike Talk.
Bluegrass Cycling Club is proud to support Bike Talk as an underwriter for Lexington Community Radio. For more information, you may visit bgcycling.net. Hi, I'm your host, Wanda Bertram. Today we're joined by Emiko Atherton. Emiko is with Smart Growth America and is the executive director of the National Complete Streets Coalition, which is having a really big impact right here in our own community and in our state. Emiko, it's great to have you on the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Wanda.
It's great for you to be here. I'm so excited. And we want to talk a lot about the Complete Streets Coalition, but you work for Smart Growth America. You're part of a larger organization. So let's start there with the big picture with Smart Growth America and tell us about it a little bit. What is Smart Growth and what does Smart Growth America do?
Great. So Smart Growth America is a national organization that really works to improve lives by improving communities. So we really work in what we call the built environment space. So the land and the buildings that are and the environment in which our communities operate within. And so that might be housing, transportation, land use, development, resiliency, and climate change. So we're really about, again, building these healthy communities, healthy physical communities to create healthy communities for people. Smart growth is the idea that we're building communities that are compact, they're walkable, they're environmentally sound. They support economic opportunity for all people, regardless of age or gender or race. So it's really about how do we smartly build our communities. It's really we're thinking about kind of not just building out, but building in. And so to preserve the environment, but then to, again, support multiple modes of transportation. Smart Growth America itself is almost an umbrella organization for a lot of programs that work, again, in that built environment space. So there's groups like Transportation for America, which work on federal and state transportation policy. Locus, which is our responsible real estate program, and a coalition of real estate professionals who are committed to smart growth. The Form-Based Code Institute, which is our newest program that really works in the land use space, or how do we support form-based code so that when we're building, we're not just thinking about what's in the building. So we previously used to design communities where we'd separate residential and commercial and industrial, and now we're trying to bring them all together. Our Local Leaders Council, which is a coalition of locally elected council members, mayors, county executives who are interested in smart growth. The Governor's Institute on Community Design, which works with governors around the country on smart growth priorities to them. And then there's the National Complete Streets Coalition, which I head, which works to promote the adoption of complete streets policies across the country and then work to get those implemented.
So lots going on.
There's a lot going
umbrella.
on.
Yeah. And one thing that I've heard you say is that it's really about giving people choices about how they want to live. So with the Complete Streets Coalition, can you briefly talk about what that is and how it fits into SGA, into Smart Growth America?
Absolutely. So what we believe fundamentally at the National Complete Streets Coalition is that really having transportation choices is a fundamental right of people. And what that means is regardless of who you are or where you live, whether it's, what age you are, what gender, what race, ethnicity, or ability, that you're able to travel from your origin to your destination in the way you want or need to. And I say want or need because some of us, like myself, like to bike and walk, and other people can't afford a car or aren't able to operate one, so that we have the choices, and that really we don't just have the choices, but the choices are equal in terms of comfort, in terms of reliability, in terms of safety, accessibility, affordability, and travel time. So that, if I am at home and I want to get to my job or my church or a grocery store or a medical appointment, I can choose to take whatever mode that I want, and I'm going to have an experience that's positive.
No one mode is always right for every situation.
Absolutely not.
So those
Yeah.
choices are critical. And too often now, we are often limited to one choice.
Right, right.
And our society has been built around that. So National Complete Streets Coalition, and it's beautiful. I love what you do. It's about giving people those choices.
Exactly.
To be healthier.
Exactly.
And this just sounds like an incredible job. It sounds like a really fun job. Can you tell me how you found this job, or it found you?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of both. So before I had this job, I worked in a local government, actually for a local elected official, which is how I really fell in love with complete streets and transportation policy married with public health policy, actually, that we want to do this not just for mode choice, but also it's the healthy choice. When we do this, we actually improve our health. And when I was working for this elected official for 5 years, and she decided to retire, and I really wanted to take a break, so I actually spent a year traveling the world.
No kidding.
Yeah, and
how exciting
it was
for you.
really
That's
exciting.
Bold too.
Right. It was really exciting. And one of the things that I noticed on that trip was how far America was behind, not only Europe, but places in Asia, North Africa, South America, in terms of presenting different choices for transportation. And so I decided to end my trip by taking public transit across the United States, which was by far the most challenging part of my trip.
I cannot imagine.
Yeah, it was the only time that my mom made me call her every day. She said she wasn't worried about me in India, but she was worried about me in the United States taking the
Trying
Greyhound.
to get across the Great Plains.
Yeah, she was terrified. And at the end, I was like, this is just, because I had worked on all different types of policies. I had worked on flood management, I had worked on land use, transportation, and public health. It was like a jack of all trades in policy. And I was like, this is it. I believe so strongly in this after experiencing transportation throughout the world that I moved to D.C., and while I was looking for work, a friend of mine told me about a job opportunity because her friend was leaving that job. And funny enough, I'm from Seattle, Washington, and Roger Millar, the former director of the Complete Streets Coalition, was moving to Washington to then take the assistant secretary position for the Washington State Department of Transportation. And so I think we started talking, and he loved that I was a Washingtonian, but also my background in public health and transportation, which was something the Complete Streets Coalition was moving towards, is integrating kind of the public health goals within that. And so we kind of found each other that way.
It was meant to be.
It was meant to be. It's like you put out into the universe, like, this would be my dream job, and I was a little bit shocked when it came out. And it was just, and it's funny because I still work with Roger so much because he works on, transportation policy, but also because he works in my home state, so we share a lot of colleagues. So it did feel like it was meant to be.
Common passion.
Yeah, yeah.
And so now you're in Washington, D.C.
I am,
which
yeah.
is where your organization is. Wonderful. Well, let's talk a little bit about the Complete Streets Coalition. And first of all, why Complete Streets? What are all of the benefits? You'd mentioned one, health.
Right. So complete streets are great because the idea isn't, a complete street isn't just one type of street, but it's really an approach to transportation planning that says from the onset, from, the first thought, you're going to think about all users of the transportation system when you're planning a system out. The benefits are huge. So we talk about the safety benefits. a lot because we actually are seeing, more people who want to walk and bike. We're seeing all new types of transportation options like dockless bike share, and we have scooters now in DC, but we don't have the infrastructure to protect them. And actually, pedestrian and bicycle fatalities are on the rise, even though traffic fatalities overall are going down. So safety is a huge part of that, but also...
And is that because there are more people out walking now and more people out cycling? Is that part
It's
of
a
it?
combination of we have more people out there, but we don't have the roads to support that. And so it's a combo of both. I think we also, the health benefits are huge. Our country is facing a chronic disease epidemic. 4 in 10 Americans are 4 in 10 Americans are obese, and 7 in 10 Americans are overweight. That's according to the Center for Disease Control. And the CDC would say the number one kind of prescription for that is physical activity, but so many people don't have the basic option to walk in their own community, that it's just, again, providing people choices. Also, the economic benefits are huge. For an individual, having a reliable transportation option is often a pipeline to a better job.
Absolutely.
Right, and we have many low-income people who are moving farther out of cities, yet with less transportation choices they can afford. But also, walkable, bikeable communities have benefits to local economies because they really support local businesses. You get people out on the streets, and what do they want to do? They want to sit around and have a beer, or buy a souvenir, or buy some clothes from the local boutique.
I think I heard you say that drivers don't make good consumers.
Yeah, we always say drivers don't make good window shoppers.
Good window shoppers.
Yep. So drivers don't make good window shoppers, but we also see, just the social benefits to people out on the street and interacting with each other. So we see a lot of benefits to these transportation choices.
Well, excellent. Well, we're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back, so stay tuned in. Welcome back to Bike Talk on Lexington Community Radio. I'm your host, Wanda Bertram. Today we're joined by Emiko Atherton. She's the Executive Director of the National Complete Streets Coalition, and we've been talking about what else? Complete streets. So, Emiko, can you talk a little bit about the coalition itself? What's its history?
Great. So the coalition was founded in 2005 by a group of organizations that really were interested in changing how the federal government talked and planned and funded transportation projects. So again, they wanted to move beyond just considering bicycle and pedestrian projects as enhancements or additions to integrating them into every roadway from day one. And so when, the idea was when you're thinking about a transportation project, you're thinking about all users in the funding stage, in the planning stage, in the building and the operating and maintenance. So it was groups like AARP.
Really?
Mm-hmm. Who have a lot of members that are interested in living in walkable communities and yet are most vulnerable to traffic fatalities when they're walking. We had groups like the American Public Transit Association. It's really an association of many of the nation's transit agencies. The National Association of Realtors, who are seeing that more and more people are having a demand, or there's a huge growing demand for walkable communities. Groups like the American Society of Landscape Architects.
It's an amazing coalition.
Yeah, the Institute of Transportation Engineers. We now have the American Heart Association, the American Public Health Association, the National Association of City Transportation Officials, the Association of Pedestrian and Bike Officials. So
diverse organization.
It's a really diverse organization, and they serve they were the founding members. So it's a coalition at its core. They now serve, we were originally our own nonprofit before we joined Smart Growth America. So today those organizations serve as organizational steering committee members and set a lot of the direction for the coalition. And they also help support us financially through donations, but also promoting our work out there, assisting with grants. So they're really kind of the backbone of the organization.
So tell me about your work. How does this play out in the communities that you visit? Because you're on the road a lot.
I'm on the road every week. Every week, I think, this year. So I always say we operate in three spaces. At our core, we were an advocacy organization. We, came together to target Congress and say, Congress, we want you to tell the U.S. Department of Transportation to do something different. But like Congress it took over 10 years for Congress to do anything about complete streets. So we started to move into other areas. So we have this advocacy branch, but we also have what I call thought leadership. So we put out reports that really support the case for walkable, bikeable communities or complete streets, showing both the safety problems, but some of the economic and health benefits. And then we have a technical assistance program, and that's really what gets me on the road every week, is that we provide direct support to communities to either help them adopt a strong complete streets policy, and now we have 1,400 complete streets policies in the country, adopted in all 50 states, but we also help them get complete streets projects implemented and on the ground.
And you have been doing a lot of work in Kentucky.
I have, specifically in Lexington.
In Lexington, in this community. Would you like to talk about that a little bit?
I'd love to, because I love that work. So about a year ago, we were really fortunate at the National Complete Streets Coalition to receive one of the few what they're called Road to Zero innovation grants from the National Safety Council. So right now the National Safety Council is leading a nationwide challenge to move towards zero fatalities on our roadways. And so they have money to give out. They give out about $1 million every year to a small set of organizations to really try innovative new projects. And we got funding to do something called the Safe Streets Academy, where we would create a peer learning group or a cohort of 30 people, 10 from 3 cities, who would work together in each other's cities to learn about how to implement complete streets, but then actually have to build a project on the ground. So we selected 3 communities. The first 2 were Orlando and South Bend, and then Lexington came in at the last minute and put together probably the best application.
Lexington.
Yeah, and so we ended up selecting the city of Lexington, and we worked with Lexington for a period of about 9 months on, again, learning the fundamentals of how to bring complete streets to the city, but then how to actually bring it to the street. And so they did a demonstration project with our support here in Lexington that calmed traffic around a popular night market. And so that's the work that we've been doing here. Yeah.
And what was unique about this, though, is it was a learning. It brought together 3 communities that have learned from each other. Can you describe what that process looked like? So It wasn't Lexington just working on our own. We were all learning from each other, and then different components of our city were also learning how to work better together.
That's exactly it. One of the things that I've learned through this job is that every city has really talented people, but sometimes they are just looking for peers and other people to bounce ideas off of. And I really hoped that at the end of this Safe Streets Academy, that they wouldn't just have the connections with those of us at the National Complete Streets Coalition, but they would have peers and friends and colleagues throughout the country they could reach to when they had a problem. And we wanted to support, again, this peer learning environment. So we actually started the training in Orlando, Florida, and Orlando hosted us for 2 days. And we flew in the cohort from Lexington and South Bend. So there was an element of, adventure and fun. And Orlando took us on a bike ride and showed us their city, and we got to know, so people got to know each other. We then moved for our second training here to Lexington.
And Orlando is unique because of its environment.
It's totally different than here. It is it's geographically ginormous and has some of the most unsafe streets for pedestrians in the country. But it's also one of the most popular tourist destinations in the United States. So it's very unique. But we got to see that, and in some ways you have unique challenges to every community. But funny enough, most communities, whether you're New York or Lexington, you have some of the same challenges, regardless of where you go. So that cohort, the second time we wound up in Lexington, and then we ended in South Bend, Indiana. So we got to spend a lot of time together, which I think was really important, having discussions, problem solving. We did a lot less lecture and a lot more case studies, interactive learning, where they were put together to solve challenging problems with peers from other cities.
So the peers came into Lexington and looked at Lexington's case study.
Yeah.
And could contribute to the problem
Exactly.
solving through a different lens.
Mm-hmm.
So
That was exactly it.
So that's beautiful. And what were some of the results? What were some of the projects, the demonstration projects?
Right. So in Orlando, they built what's known as a road diet, or they converted a two-way street with 4 lanes to a two-way street for half a mile with a center turn lane and then 2 protected bike lanes on the other side. Here in Lexington, they did a few things to essentially do traffic calming in a particular neighborhood. And then they did something very similar in South Bend, where they took a neighborhood that a lot of people who don't live in this community speed through to cut through the main, to essentially avoid the traffic on the main road. So they speed through these homes with lots of young children and the elderly, and they did the same thing where they built traffic calming countermeasures. And so they built things like traffic circles or chicanes or bump outs within those communities.
And it seems like a lot of these projects were about trying something new and different, but they were not necessarily permanent projects for a reason.
Exactly. We wanted people to try things out they wouldn't otherwise try. And, the thought behind the Safe Streets grant that we got was creating a moonshot. What would be something wild that they could do? And by doing something temporary, I think we were psychologically trying to do something. 1, make it a little less scary to try something new. 2, the community, we are all resistant to change. I'm absolutely one of them. I get so, like in my own neighborhood, I'll be like, they changed something, like, so that they could go out and tell the community, hey, we're just going to try this out, but we don't have to keep it if it's going to stick. And
so,
then
if you don't like it, it's
we'll
not
take
forever. We'll
Right.
take it out. If you
Right.
do like it, maybe we can find a way to
Exactly.
keep the elements that we like.
Exactly, but it brought some it essentially built this kind of a safety net for the project, and then it gave the cities the political will to, again, try something new with being part of this national, recognized program. And so it gave them the prestige to say, hey, we've been awarded this. We have to do this because we're part of this nationally recognized grant.
And that was a big deal for
Yeah.
Lexington, for the city of Lexington, Scott Thompson and his cohorts to be one of 3 of this group that were selected out of how many applicants?
I think we probably had about 35, but when I say 35, there were cities like the city of Chicago, the city of Atlanta, Houston, Dallas, and San Antonio all applied. Philadelphia applied, Oakland. So it was, the Los Angeles County. So they were competing with some of the biggest cities in the country that are doing some of the most amazing work on complete streets. And so it was a really challenging and competitive applicant pool.
So quite an honor for Lexington.
It was quite an honor, yeah.
To be in this project. All right, well, we're going to take another short break, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to Bike Talk on Lexington Community Radio. Thanks for tuning in. I'm your host, Wanda Bertram. Today we're joined by Emiko Atherton. She is the Executive Director of the National Complete Streets Coalition, and we've been talking about a demonstration project that took place in Lexington and is still taking place. I believe it's over on Loudon Avenue. They're collecting data.
Yeah.
I think this is measurable.
Mm-hmm.
How do you measure the effects, the success rate of this?
So, I might take a step back, and we actually asked all the cities that participated in the Safe Streets Academy to measure before and after data, because one of the things that we're learning is when something good really happens, people have never collected the data to tell that good story, but that also it's a way to give the city and those interested in these new infrastructure improvements the story to tell when people are pushing back. Often, I mentioned we worked in South Bend, and there was another project in South Bend in their downtown, where they really improved the safety. And everyone who commuted through the city complained that it delayed their commute time and they weren't able to get to work. And when they actually presented the data, most people's commute was delayed by about a minute, but the safety improvements were huge, and even bigger, the economic developments to the downtown were incredible. When I first started visiting South Bend, there was one hotel to stay at, the DoubleTree, and now there's 4, and that's within 3 years, and in part because they turned these into really vibrant streets, but they couldn't tell that story without measuring travel time, safety benefits, but also the sales tax change. And so really it helps tell that positive story. And the media then could grasp onto those stories instead of the ones with the commuter that complained that their commute is now a minute slower.
Yeah, so what you heard in that case were the complaints that my commute has been slowed down, but when you measured it, it was by a minute or two. And you're saving lives, and people are getting out and walking and being healthy and can commute in other ways much more safely, so you can tell the fuller story.
Exactly.
And I believe some of the outcomes for the demonstration project in Lexington on Loudon Drive, I believe the neighborhood wanted to slow down the traffic.
Right.
And so it sounds like from the data that they're getting and the reports that they're getting is that the neighborhood is pleased that the traffic is being slowed down, but very similarly, people don't like being slowed down who are just passing through the neighborhood. It's a route to somewhere else. So it tells both of those stories.
It does tell both of those stories, but it's important to have all those stories, and this is where I think it's important to have data. Because our perceptions sometimes are very different than the reality. I mean, I know, it's like, have you ever done like the plank? The exercise, the plank, where you're right. A minute in plank feels like 10 minutes.
10 years.
Right.
Feels like 10 years.
Right. But a minute when you're at a party or you don't want to leave somewhere feels like a second. And so our perception of time is really, it's really subjective. And so this feeling that people feel like they're getting delayed or that something has happened is sometimes, they could honestly feel like that. And, we don't want to invalidate how they feel.
Yeah, when you're in a hurry to get somewhere, getting stopped at a light can be frustrating.
Right, and it feels really disempowering. But when you actually understand that it was only a minute, I think then people can start to rationalize. They can start to really understand. Well, then this is worth it, because again, I think having that data. Well, actually, I was okay giving that minute, but that probably felt like 10 minutes in the moment where I was stuck behind a stop sign. And so I think it again, and then it gives policymakers the choice to say, even if people aren't happy with that minute or two, we've decided to prioritize something else. And it's worth that minute. Saving a life is worth a minute of somebody's commute time.
And all of these projects are focused on different things, sounds like. So it'll be interesting to see what the results are when all of the data is gathered and what Lexington decides to do with that information.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because they have several choices.
Right. It will be very fun to hear how that turns out.
So one question too, as we look at the bigger picture, when you look at Kentucky and other states, is Kentucky a walking and biking state?
So when I look at, because I've unfortunately only been to Lexington, which is just my own fault because I can't wait to see the rest of the state.
Well, you can't be everywhere, and you're in a different town.
But I would love to see more of Kentucky, because what I've seen
have you hear more,
is just beautiful. Is that it has the potential to be. We looked at. My office recently looked at, the amount of the amount of people who are walking and biking in the country, and I think for walkers, you are 30th in the country, and for bikers, you're 35th. But you're also, according to our Dangerous by Design report, which lists the most dangerous places to walk, you're 21. So you're not the worst place to walk, but you're certainly not in the the best either. So there's a lot to do in terms
in
of
the middle.
safety. One of the biggest things that I realized recently is that I talked about complete streets policies, and we've got 1,400 now in the country, but only 10 in Kentucky, which is less than 1%. So there's a
Yes.
lot of opportunity. I think, I've been really inspired by everyone I've met in Kentucky, whether I'm in Kentucky or outside, and the commitment to biking and walking. So I think, again, there's a lot of potential, but you're not there yet.
But we can get there.
You can get there. You can absolutely get there.
And a lot has happened in Kentucky in the last couple of years to really increase the impetus of what's going on with pedestrian and cycling issues. And in August 2018, we had the Kentucky Bike Walk Summit, which I think has done great things to improve our advocacy and think about how we can do that better.
Absolutely. There's so much energy in Kentucky. I think it's when people get together and really focus this could be a top biking and walking state.
It could. And when we look at walking and biking, let's talk about the demographics of that a little bit. Is there any difference in demographics about who walks and who bikes and safety?
Yeah, what's been really interesting is that there's, for a long time, biking and walking has been on the rise. And they're kind of leveling out right now in terms of the number of people biking and walking. I would imagine they'll continue to. It usually actually varies a lot depending on the economy. The more people that are going to work, you're going to see more people driving. But what's interesting is who is biking and walking has been changing a lot. And we're seeing a lot more people of color on bicycles and walking. I think, often in the United States, income and race are highly correlated. So we also see a lot of low-income people who are representing a higher share of the bikers and walkers, in part because it's a really affordable choice. Unfortunately, we're seeing that same thing reflected in the numbers. I mentioned earlier that overall traffic fatalities are going down. Bicycle and pedestrian fatalities are going up. Even as bicycle and pedestrian rates are remaining the same. So that means we're killing more people on our roadways. Last year, over 6,000 people died while walking on America's streets. There were 800 reported bicycle fatalities, but that doesn't tell the whole story at all. The only national database we have is for pedestrian fatalities, not for pedestrian injuries, not for bicycle fatalities, not for bicycle injuries. So we're seeing this changing face of who is biking and walking, which is really exciting, but we're also seeing, unfortunately, that reflected in who we're hurting and killing the most. We also see a much greater proportion of older adults who are being killed while walking on America's streets.
And why is that, do you think?
I think it's because, older adults, our infrastructure is really designed for the vehicle in mind, but as, I'm someone in their late 30s who is pretty mobile, and sometimes I have to outrun a crosswalk. It's like the moment you start in the crosswalk, it starts cutting down.
It's counting down.
It's counting down. But if you, as people get older, their mobility changes, and they may no longer be able to kind of outrun this unsafe infrastructure. So it's really, although there might even be a crosswalk, it's not one that's actually. It might be too wide, and they can't cross it in the right amount of time. They're often more exposed, and they don't. So I think that's one of the reasons we're seeing more older adults being struck and killed by cars.
Which is one reason AARP is such a strong proponent of complete streets.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to take another break because it's that time, and we'll be back with you in a few moments. Welcome back to Bike Talk on Lexington Community Radio. I'm your host, Wanda Bertram. Today we're joined by Emiko Atherton. Emiko is the Executive Director of the National Complete Streets Coalition. And we've been talking about biker and pedestrian safety and how that plays out among different demographics. And Emiko, one question that struck me, is that Kentucky is kind of in the middle, but What would it take for Kentucky to improve, to be a number one walking and biking state?
That's a great question. I think earlier I said, starting local is really important. So getting complete streets policies passed throughout the state of Kentucky. But two, I think it requires the elected officials throughout Kentucky really making that commitment, and that's from city councils up to the governor's office. One of the things that's interesting is that a lot of roadways within most states are controlled by the State Department of Transportation. So really having the state as a great partner for the cities, I think, would be one, and getting the complete streets policy passed by the state of Kentucky. I think also having strong advocates is really important. I think, as elected officials are willing to go out there and take the leadership, they need that political backing from advocates.
They have to have it.
Right, to have their back, because some of the things that they're doing, not everybody's going to like. And to really, we need to support them, and then we need to call them out when they're not doing right. So having, I'm a really strong believer in a big advocacy backing. I think that would be really big. And then just starting to try things out.
Such as this demonstration
as the demonstration project, just starting to try things to get people familiar with them. It is a huge thing that people can do, but support the city. Make sure that, if the city tries something, again, this is the role of advocates, and really what people who are interested in biking, walking is go out there and support the city, write op-eds, make sure that that your city and your elected officials have that support and have your backing. And then work to help try to get them funding. I mean, what's great is there's a lot of smaller funding programs right now that allow your cities to do innovative things. AARP has community challenge grants once a year. They're pretty small. They're from $5,000 to about $15,000. But you as an advocate can apply for those, and you can get, say, a small demonstration project done in your community. I know the National Association of Realtors has a Smart Growth Grant program, where if you get a local realtor to apply, they might be able to bring another $15,000 to $25,000 to your community.
That's a great
to
idea.
do a demonstration project. So think about
that's a
also
fabulous idea.
How can you make local and statewide coalitions as you're forming advocacy groups? One of the reasons I think the Complete Streets Coalition has been so effective is because from day one, and I don't get to take any credit for this, a really strong coalition was built. And so as a biker and walker, I might not always have the most political power, but when I go up to Capitol Hill and I bring the AARP lobbyist, you better bet doors
They're
open
gonna
for me.
listen.
And so I think, building a really broad-based coalition, so recognizing this isn't just about kind of the typical, they say, the top 5% of cyclists, or those of us who are fearless or, willing to really bike in the street, but think about older adults, think about our children, think about, my mom who just wants to stay in her house and keep her garden when she can't drive anymore, and build coalitions from there to really, again, support elected officials, but also put pressure on them to take action.
Not the usual suspects.
And not the usual suspects. A funny story is, so there's this national group called the League of American Cyclists, and they've always been the national group for the cycling organizations, and their lobbyist told me that when they started Lobby Day, where people would fly in to meet with their congressional representative, they had to write multiple emails and say multiple times, you cannot wear your spandex in these meetings because no one will take you seriously. But it's true that for better or worse,
it promotes the stereotype.
But when I bring in the Heart Association, when I bring in AARP or the Realtors or these other groups that really cross spaces, a lot of business improvement districts, Main Street alliances are seeing value in complete streets. So you get the businesses, you get developers that see, they're really winning on their bottom line goes up with complete streets. And you bring this really diverse group of stakeholders and you build a coalition, and it's hard for elected officials to say no to that.
Yeah. So if I am living in a neighborhood in downtown Lexington and I want my street to be more complete than it is. I want my kids to be safer. I want my grandmother to be able to cross the street to get to the farmer's market. Mm-hmm. What can I do?
I think the first thing you should do is call up your city and say, how can we get this done? And then if they say no, say, well, why no? I think sometimes we just don't ask enough questions. Particularly on roads that city might own, you can go ahead and try things out like Lexington did. If you are listening to this and haven't seen what Lexington did, it was a relatively low-cost project. And just ask your city, can we try something out?
Can we try something similar on my street?
Right. And there are a lot of inexpensive materials. There's a group, they're a private group in New York called Streets Plans, but they actually put out a free tactical urbanism guide. And what's great about this, I think if you just go to, if you type in Streets Plans tactical urbanism into a search bar, what they do is they actually have a book of low-cost materials you can buy. So it's a really practical resource. If you want to try something out for a weekend or a week, here are some cheap materials you can buy, and you can see if you can crowdsource the funding in your community. So sometimes you might not get something permanent, but ask them, can we try something for a week? Let us try something for a week. We'll provide the labor. We can help fundraise the materials. You can often get things donated. One of my favorite things is bump outs are a really great way to slow traffic, and it's when you get to an intersection, you actually extend the sidewalk into the
street
road.
a little bit.
And one of the best ways to do this from a kind of short-term perspective is you take giant planters out, and I've seen this done where actually a hardware store or a florist might donate those for a week, and then they get them back, and so they were actually free, and they're beautiful. And so start to think about innovative ways to so sometimes I say start small. And what can you do, what can you do in a day? What can you do in a week? And then what can you do in a month and a year?
And just keep building on it.
And just keep building on that because, I heard someone say about this Loudon Street project here in Lexington is it was a great angry question that they asked me is, how can you offer this to communities and then take it away? And because and the thing is, well, wait, and I said, well, we actually didn't ever want it to go away. But once people have things, they don't want it to go away. But sometimes it's that just initial fear of getting something new. But once they see it, they rarely want it gone.
So, Emiko, what's next for the Complete Streets Coalition?
That's a great question. Well, we're going to continue to really expand our technical assistance program and bring things like these demonstration projects to communities across the United States. The thing I'm most excited about that's coming up is we're going to be releasing a new edition of our Dangerous by Design report that again looks at the most dangerous places to walk in the United States. One of the reasons I think this is important is it builds a sense of urgency. For the last 10 years, the state of Florida has been the most dangerous state to walk in, but it's also because of this report we've worked hand in hand with the Florida Department of Transportation since 2012 to really improve their streets. So that's what I'm most excited about. But again, just getting out, working with the communities to get those policies passed, but then to get them implemented and get projects on the ground.
Like the one in Lexington.
Like the one in Lexington. We want to see a lot more of those.
Well, we hope to see more of those here as well.
Yeah.
To keep finding ways to improve our infrastructure and make our streets more complete.
Yeah. I'd love to see a lot more of them in the state of Kentucky.
Yeah. So, Emiko, if someone wants more information on Complete Streets and wanted some of the materials that you've been talking about, how do they get that information?
So the best way to get this is something I'm really proud of is that all of our materials are free. So you can access them through www.completestreets.org. And you can find all of our reports. You can find case studies about the demonstration projects. You can find primers on, what is a good Complete Streets policy, what are examples of stories of people getting them passed in their own community through this website.
Well, you can't make it any easier than that.
No, and we try to, again, make them free, and that our phone number is on the website as well, and you're always welcome to talk to me or anyone on the Complete Streets team. It's our favorite thing to do is really directly help communities.
Well, thank you so much.
We
so much appreciate that.
Thank you.
And that's all the time that we have for today's show, unfortunately. So, Emiko, thank you so much for your time being with us today.
Thank you.
And don't forget to tune in to Bike Talk at the same time next week for all things cycling, helping you get out, explore our towns and countryside in Lexington and beyond. Thanks for joining us. Be safe and enjoy the ride. Bluegrass Cycling Club is proud to support Bike Talk as an underwriter for Lexington Community Radio. More information, you may visit bgcycling.net.